the Palestinian people as a product of the KGB Disinformation Department. Following the 1947-49 Arab-Israeli War, the Gaza Strip was occupied by Egypt and remained under its control until the Six-Day War of 1967. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser was the first to take a course toward turning the Gaza Strip into a terrorist enclave. The Egyptian government formed Fedayeen militias, martyrs of Islam, in Gaza, who carried out terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians. When speaking about the war against the Jews, Nasser deliberately resorted to the terminology of Islamic jihad, which was understandable and familiar to the Arab world. Jihad is a religious war waged by Muslims against non-Muslims. This is what the Arab world's war against the State of Israel was and remains. There are two main reasons for the ongoing religious war between the Arabs and the Jewish state. The first is the Islamic prohibition against relinquishing land to non-Muslims. Moshe Sharon, a professor of Arab studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, writes about this. Quote, "Any territory that was under Muslim rule at any point in history is forever considered Muslim land. Therefore, the establishment of the State of Israel on territory that once belonged to Muslims is a historic coup for them. Muslims cannot accept this fact in principle." End of quote. The second reason is related to the status of Jews in Islamic law. This is explained by Mordecai Kedar, a doctor of historical sciences and Orientalist at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies in Israel. Quote, "Muslims hate Jews because the Quran demands it of them. In Quranic texts, Jews are called children of apes and pigs. The murder of Jews is not only not prohibited, but is even encouraged by the Quran. From a Muslim perspective, Jews, as inferior human beings, have no right to a sovereign state. The most they can hope for in Islamic countries is the humiliating status of dhimmi, temporarily tolerated subjects. It was Muslims who invented the yellow stripe, an identification mark for Jews. This practice was later adopted by the Nazis." End of quote. Dr. Kaider's position is supported by the book Dhimmi, Jews and Christians Under Islam, by the Jewish writer Bat Yor, whose family was forced to flee Egypt in 1957. This work provides extensive evidence of the situation of Jewish communities in Muslim countries of North Africa and the Middle East over the past 300 years. Arabs have never hidden the fact that they are waging a religious war against the State of Israel. However, in the non-Islamic world, this war is often perceived as a national liberation movement. Who, how, and for what purpose transformed Islamic jihad into a liberation struggle? A look into history and the memoirs of a direct participant in these events will help answer these questions. Following the defeats of the Arab states in the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, the jihad against the State of Israel gradually lost its former scale, and it seemed that peace could come to the Middle East. However, as early as the early 1960s, the Soviet Union's leadership took steps to prevent this. Viewing Israel as a Western outpost in the region, Soviet leaders sought to perpetuate the Arab-Israeli conflict by disguising Islamic jihad as a national liberation movement. In the early 1960s, Soviet mentors convinced President Nasser that to wage a successful terrorist war against Israel, it was necessary to secure the support of progressive Western public opinion. To achieve this, they proposed resorting to deceptive tactics, the essence of which was as follows. First, replace the religious rhetoric of jihad with the terminology of national liberation struggle. Second, to proclaim the existence of a distinct Arab people of Palestine and create official structures representing its interests. It was proposed to call this people Palestinian. Until the mid-1960s, the term Palestinians referred to Palestinian Jews, while the Arabs of Palestine, considering themselves an integral part of the pan-Arab ethnicity, vehemently rejected this designation. By renaming the Arabs Palestinians, Soviet propagandists sought to associate the Muslim conquerors from Arabia with Palestine. And third, to present the war against Israel not as a punitive campaign of the multi-million Arab world against a rebellious handful of despised dhimmis, oppressed non-Muslims under the rule of Islam who dared to create their own state, but as a national liberation struggle of a small Palestinian people against Jewish colonizers who supposedly surpassed them in numbers and strength. The role of the USSR in the creation of the liberation movement of the Palestinian people became known thanks to the book Disinformation by the Romanian intelligence general Securitate Ion Pacepa, who worked directly with Yasser Arafat from the late 1960s. As Pacepa notes, the favorite tactic of the Soviet Committee for State Security, or KGB specialists, was to transform terrorist organizations into national liberation movements. This transformation allowed for the legitimization of terrorism and the support it received from Western left-wing circles. Quote, "The KGB had a penchant for liberation movements. The Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, the National Liberation Army of Colombia, and the National Liberation Army of Bolivia were just a few of the liberation movements born at the KGB." End of quote. The KGB's next step, as Pacepa writes, was to promote its own agents, led by Yasser Arafat, to the leadership of the Palestine Liberation Organization. Quote, "Yasser Arafat was a product of the Kremlin's science of disinformation, and he ultimately became an expert in manipulating this invisible weapon. Arafat was actually a bourgeois Egyptian nationalist turned Palestinian terrorist by a KGB disinformation operation in the mid-1960s. As a first step, the KGB destroyed the official records of Arafat's birth in Cairo, Egypt, replacing them with fictitious documents attesting that he had been born in Jerusalem and was indeed a Palestinian by birth. Next, the KGB gave Arafat an ideology and an ideological image, just as it gave them to Indian communist Ramesh Chandra, the chairman of the undercover KGB organization portentously named the World Peace Council. The KGB Disinformation Department tasked Arafat to create and head a terrorist group named Fatah, and in the aftermath of the six-day Arab-Israeli War, it maneuvered to catapult him up as chairman of the PLO. Egyptian ruler Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was also a Soviet puppet, publicly proposed the appointment. The rest is history. In 1964, the first PLO Council, consisting of 422 Palestinian representatives hand-picked by the KGB, approved the Palestinian National Charter, a document that had been drafted in Moscow. The Palestinian National Covenant and the Palestinian Constitution were also born in Moscow, with the help of Ahmed Shukayri, a KGB influence agent who became the first PLO chairman. This new PLO was headed by a Soviet-style executive committee made up of 15 members who, like their comrades in Moscow, also headed departments. After the Six-Day War of 1967, the KGB elevated Comrade Arafat to the rank of Palestinian leader. In 1969, the KGB secured for Arafat the post of chairman of the PLO Executive Committee. End of quote. President Nasser listened to his Soviet mentors, and in 1964 the Palestine Liberation Organization was established in Cairo, designed to represent the interests of the Arabs who lived in Mandatory Palestine before the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. In the same year 1964, the Palestinian National Charter was adopted in Jordanian-occupied East Jerusalem, proclaiming the existence of the Arab people of Palestine. This document serves as official evidence that the stated goal of the Palestinian people is not the creation of their own state, but the destruction of the State of Israel. Surprisingly, not one of the 33 articles of the Palestinian Charter mentions the aspirations of the Palestinian people to establish their own state. The document devotes 6 articles to Zionism, but not a single one to the question of a Palestinian state. Another noteworthy fact is that the Arabs named their future state Palestine, a Roman word, because the Arabic language has no native name for this land. For example, the Quran refers to this territory by the Christian-borrowed term sacred land. Having borrowed the Roman name, the Palestinians found themselves in a comical situation. Due to the absence of the letter P in the Arabic alphabet, they pronounce the word Palestine as Philistin. The question that inevitably arises here is Is there a people in the world who are unable to correctly pronounce the name of their own homeland? These facts cast doubt on the historical connection of Arabs with the Holy Land. Documentary evidence is provided by Michael Chernon's book, The Arab Population of Israel and the Palestinian Territories, published by the Institute of Middle East Studies of the Russian Federation in 2007. According to Chernon's research, based on Arab sources, the vast majority of Arab tribes and clans currently residing in Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and the Gaza Strip have origins unrelated to Palestine. For example, among the Arab clans currently residing in Gaza City, not a single one could be considered indigenous Palestinian. Most are of Egyptian origin, followed by people from the Maghreb, Arabia, Syria, and Iraq. Although the Soviet Union, the godfather of the Palestinian people, has disappeared from the stage of history, the Fabian Society has taken up the baton of militant anti-Zionism. Relying on the structures it controls, the Labour Party and the Socialist International, the Fabians are now leading the war waged by left-wing parties and left-wing governments against the Jewish state. A striking example of this was the campaign initiated by London in April 2025 to recognize the non-existent state of Palestine. The initiative of the British Prime Minister, leader of the Labour Party and member of the Fabian Society, Keir Starmer, to recognize the state of Palestine was supported by heads of state-leading parties that are members of the Socialist International or are within the British sphere of influence. Among them, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, leader of the Liberal Party and former governor of the Bank of England; Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, leader of the Labour Party; Malta Prime Minister Robert Abela, leader of the Labour Party; Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Støre, leader of the Labour Party; Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, leader of the Socialist Workers' Party; Portuguese Prime Minister Luís Montenegro, leader of the Social Democratic Party; and French President Emmanuel Macron. The members of the Socialist International listed above are the British Labour Party, the Australian Labour Party, the Norwegian Labour Party, the Maltese Labour Party, and the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party. The remaining parties and political leaders are, to varying degrees, within London's orbit of influence. For example, the Liberal Party of Canada is a member of Liberal International, whose headquarters are in London. French President Emmanuel Macron is a former employee of Rothschild & C, a bank owned by the Rothschild family, which has remained a symbol of British influence for centuries. Portugal, since the overthrow of the monarchy in 1910, has been within the British sphere of influence, regardless of the political orientation of the party in power. In addition to the fight against the State of Israel, the Fabian Society is the initiator and key driving force behind the process of Islamization aimed at the destruction of European civilization. Ioan Ratiu's book, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, is devoted to the study of this role of the Fabian Society. Conclusion: almost 80 years have passed since the proclamation of the existence of the Palestinian people. During this time, numerous Palestinian political and terrorist organizations have emerged. However, a Palestinian people striving for their own state has never appeared on the historical stage. Today, as in 1948, the Palestinian Arabs represent a multitude of competing and hostile tribes and clans of different ethnic and geographical origins who are not prepared to sacrifice their interests for the sake of uniting into a single Palestinian people. However, there is something that unites the Arab clans of Palestine: hatred of Jews and Israel. However, hatred cannot serve as the basis for the birth of a nation and the building of a state. Hatred is suitable for destruction. Construction requires love and camaraderie. And to build a state, a civic consciousness is needed that rises above the interests of tribes and clans, defending the interests of the entire society. A link to the article with sources is provided below this video. Thank you for your attention.